Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. It is really a pleasure to have you all together to discuss about the topic of outdoor activities in mountains, a blessing or a curse for mountain environments and societies. So this is part of our MRD Talk series. MRD is the Journal Mountain Research and Development. It's part of the project promoting innovations in mountain areas, which is funded by the Austrian Development Agency and co-implemented together with UNEP. And we are very pleased to have five distinguished panelists with us today. We would like together with these panelists to explore how different sectors, and in particular science, the private sector, but also civil society and international organizations can help to turn the challenges brought by outdoor activities into opportunities for mountain environments and societies. We will have cases from many different mountain regions of the world as well. The program is such as we will first have a series of presentations during the first hour. The presentations will be followed by a very brief time for questions and answers from the audience. So if during the presentation you have any question, please do write them in the chat and we will select a few of them for immediate response after the talk. And the second part of our talk, the second half an hour, I would say, will be dedicated to a discussion with the audience, a much more interactive format where we hope we can also get your feedback and draw on your own experiences as participants coming from different sectors and different regions of the world. Next slide, please. So in terms of presentation, we will first have a presentation by Léna Gruat from the Université de Bretagne Occidentale in Brest, France. And her presentation is entitled Coexistence Between Outdoor Activities and Wildlife in the Northern French Alps, the Viewpoint from Social Sciences. Then we will have a presentation by Tania Bacombe, who is the General Manager of the European Outdoor Conservation Association. And her presentation is entitled Raising Money for the Great Outdoors, Making a Bigger Difference by Working Together. The fourth presentation will be brought to us by Diana Alexia Gomez Cavieres and Jorge Silvas Milla, also called Coco, who are the founders of the association 7A Escalada, excuse me. And then lastly, we will have a presentation by Ansgar Fellendorf, who is an expert at the United Nations Environmental Program for the Sports and Nature Initiative. And his presentation is entitled Outdoor Sports, the Triple Planetary Crisis and Sports for Nature. So I would like now to invite Léna Gruat to give us insights from her research in the Northern Alps.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and the introduction. So I am currently at the Université de Bretagne Occidentale, which is located in Brittany on the Atlantic coast, but I actually did my PhD in the Northern Alps at the Université de Bretagne Occidentale. At Université Savoie-Mont-Blanc. And today I will present some results from my PhD. And I wanted to start this presentation by sharing a little bit about the research context. I don't always do that, but it seemed quite relevant to the theme of the webinar. And my research was actually part of an interdisciplinary program that was studying human-wildlife cohabitation from the perspective of ecology, social sciences, and management of protected areas. And the primary goal of this program was to compare the development of tourism and leisure practices in the mountains with the evolution of mountain ecosystems. And working with such a diverse team has allowed us to gain a holistic perspective on this matter. And additionally, in my opinion, it was really crucial to combine natural sciences and social sciences, because research on this topic of cohabitation and more specifically on wildlife disturbance has been researched in depth in ecology, but the research is still scarce in sociology. And as you might have guessed, my work falls within the social sciences axis, and the aim of the research was to study the recreationists. This research was carried out in collaboration with protected area managers and especially the French Office for Biodiversity, which is a public organization in France that is responsible for protecting and conserving biodiversity and natural resources. For the seminar, I was asked to present the paper From the Crowded Valleys to the Preserved Summits. And this paper deals with mountain sports participants and their attitudes towards protected areas in the northern French Alps. The aim of the paper was to examine the relationship between geographical proximity to a site of practice and the participants' knowledge and attitudes towards recreational usage restrictions. This research was carried out in light of the growing numbers of visitors in mountain regions and also in light of the impact of those growing numbers on wildlife. Because since there are so many more people that are practicing these activities these days, it is very important for protected area managers to understand the visitors' attitudes towards wildlife and conservation, so that they can raise awareness about these issues and they can implement conservation measures and promote sustainable tourism. And this knowledge is, according to me, what will help strike a balance between visitor experiences and safeguarding biodiversity. Very briefly on the method, it was a quantitative approach that I chose for this research, and people filled out questionnaires directly on the sites of practice after their activities. And they were ski tourers, hikers, snowshoers, and trail runners. But for the paper, I only focused on ski tourers and hikers. And I'll just spend a very short moment on this because it's quite important to understand fully the results. I classified the respondents based on where they lived compared to where they practice. So in deep green here we have people who live on the mountain range where they practice their activity. Lighter green, it's people who live nearby, so not in the range, but very close. And in orange, people who live further away. And the main results are, firstly, that ski tours have a lower acceptance of restrictions. They are less likely than hikers to state that tranquility areas for wildlife are necessary. And they are also much more likely to say that mountains should be a space of freedom where access should not be restricted. As we can see on the figure, the difference between hikers and skiers is even more important in the Vanoise National Park, which has the most restrictive rules out of all the sites that we studied. And these regulations and restrictions, they seem to affect skiers more than hikers, mainly because they concern specific ski tour routes, or they include limitations on off-piste skiing, for instance. Unsurprisingly, we also noticed that local residents demonstrate a higher level of knowledge about the site's status. They are significantly more aware of whether they are in a national park, a regional park, or nature reserve, and so on. They are also more familiar with the presence of specific tranquility areas within the site. However, and that's where it becomes really interesting, locals have a lower acceptance of restrictions. So they know that there are restrictions, but they don't accept those restrictions. For instance, they are less likely to say that tranquility areas are necessary. and that is true both in summer and winter. There is a shared belief among skiers that access to the mountains should not be restricted. And we can make the hypothesis that the sense of identity and community among skiers might contribute to their collective resistance to restrictions. There are various reasons that can explain a lower acceptance of restrictions in general. For example, attachment to the place, and when there's access restrictions in an area that is near your place, you might perceive it as a limitation to your own backyard, to your own personal freedom. We can also imagine that they might have a negative experience with tourism that might lead them to the belief that tourists are more responsible for disturbance or impacts in general than themselves. There is also potential conflicts with the authority, and in the case of the Panelists National Park, that is very true. To sum up, we can say that the environmental impact of nature sports represents a major challenge for maintained environments and societies. And social sciences participate in mitigating those impacts by bringing out knowledge of visitors, who they are, what are their characteristics, what is their perception of wildlife, disturbance, how do they behave when they are in nature. And this knowledge can help turn the challenges into opportunities because awareness raising in the activity can and hopefully will lead to stronger connection with nature and pro-environmental behavior, not only in the activity, but also in everyday life. And this helps tackle not only the environmental impacts of nature sports, but also the current environmental challenges. Thank you very much. And I forgot to mention that this paper was co-written with my PhD supervisors, Clémence Perrin-Malter and Anne Loison. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lena, for this brief but very informative presentation. We have the time to take one or two questions from the audience. Maybe not general comments, but because we will have the opportunity later for a discussion. But if you have a specific question, I see there is one by Kostas Stavrianakis. Did you by any chance look at mountain guides versus tourists in acceptance of restrictions?
Not mountain guides, but mountain professionals in general. And there was no significant difference, but there were not that many of them in the sample. I think it was maybe 5%, and maybe even less. So there was not a significant difference, but I think if I went into depth with interviews and with more people, there will probably be a difference.
Thank you very much. Is there another specific question for Lena? So thank you again. I think that was also very illustrative of how social sciences can actually contribute by informing also awareness raising campaigns or other actions and interventions in mountains. And now I would like to invite our second speaker, who is Tanya Decombe, the General Manager of the European Association, European Outdoor Conservation Association, excuse me, and who will give us the perspective from an association bringing together outdoor brands. So Tanya, from the private sector, can you tell us a bit more about your views and what you can do to contribute to mitigate the potential negative effects of outdoor recreation activities?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me as well. My name's Tanya. I'm Joint General Manager of the European Outdoor Conservation Association, or EOCA. We raise money from the European outdoor leisure sector to put into nature conservation projects around the world. It's about being able to make a bigger impact on the ground by everybody working together, as well as everybody taking responsibility for looking after the wild places that they depend on for their livelihood, funding conservation projects that address both the climate and the biodiversity crises. Since we started in 2006, we've raised over 5 million euros, which has been put into 184 conservation projects around the world in 65 different countries. And in the last 2.5 years alone, our projects have contributed to conservation in over 750,000 hectares of wild places. And many of those projects have taken place in mountain environments. So I'm going to answer the question of whether outdoor enthusiasts are a blessing or a curse in mountain environments with one simple word: yes, to both. So from an environmental point of view, outdoor enthusiasts can cause all sorts of disruption and damage to the habitats that they visit. Some of these are accidental or inadvertent, and they include things like erosion to paths and trails, which lead to runoff, causing siltation and damage to wildlife in rivers and lakes, trampling on and damaging fragile habitats, even causing rockfall and avalanche, disturbing nesting birds and other wildlife, particularly if you're part of a large group or event. Other activities can cause deliberate damage, such as moving rocks to build waymarkers or shelters, leaving litter, which can trap wildlife and potentially harm it or kill it, and degrading litter will leach toxins into the soil and the water surrounding it. Also, large events, which are becoming increasingly popular and can be very damaging due to the numbers of participants, causing damage, erosion, litter, and again, disturbance to wildlife. The situation has got a huge amount worse since COVID as well, where a new type of visitor, not usually seen in the mountains, was desperate to get out and be outside, but had no idea to actually how to behave in the mountains. So that the damage that they caused included things like huge amounts of litter left by people deciding to have picnics or barbecues or go camping in the mountains, and then just leaving everything once they'd finished, cutting down trees for campfires, starting fires which then got out of control, or arriving in huge numbers of cars or camper vans, causing pollution and obstruction, or churning up fragile habitats in an effort to get the car off the road. With these sorts of examples, you may be thinking that outdoor enthusiasts can be nothing but a curse in the mountains, and they should be banned from ever setting foot in these beautiful wild places. However, through EOCA's work, we know that there's a huge amount of positive benefit that outdoor enthusiasts bring to the mountains, the local communities, and above all, the biodiversity that's found there. There's a real appetite amongst outdoor enthusiasts to do the right thing and cause as little damage as possible. Outdoor enthusiasts in wild and mountainous environments bring money into local communities by buying local products and services, staying in local accommodation, which in turn brings training, education, and jobs. They help raise awareness of the uniqueness of a habitat or species in a particular place and give more value to the nature and the habitats alive rather than dead, which is on the community's doorstep. And also often they give their own time and help to restore the damage that has been done. So I'll just run through very quickly a few examples of the conservation projects that EOCA has been involved in, which have had the most tremendous positive impact on the mountain environments that they were located in. We funded trail repair projects in mountains all over the world, including in the Himalayas and Patagonia, to bring outdoor enthusiasts to the mountains, but to keep them off fragile habitats and away from wildlife. Upland, peatland and moorland areas, such as in Scotland, contain very fragile lichen and mosses, so keeping bikers and hikers on the specific trails is vital. Habitat restoration projects help repair fragile landscapes, restore water sources, re-establish high-level wetlands and protect hillsides from landslides and avalanche. IOCA has funded bog restoration projects in Argentina, mountain forest projects in Austria and the Catalan Pyrenees, and a tree project currently ongoing in the mountains of South America is aiming to plant 3 million trees this decade. The Rewilding Ennerdale project in northwest England is working to bring a valley back to as natural a state as possible, and whilst encouraging hikers and bikers to the area to enjoy the wilderness and experience conservation in action. During IOCA's 2-year focus on plastic, we removed litter from over 4,000 kilometres of trails, mountains, along lakes and rivers, and all the way down to the coast. Much of the time, the people getting involved in helping clear up this rubbish were outdoor enthusiasts. Funding has also supported cleanup operations in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, European Alps, and at Everest Base Camp. And a recent project in the Italian Dolomites worked with mountain huts to eliminate single-use plastic within those huts. Work in the French Alps as well has removed obsolete installations, including abandoned ski lifts, disused cables and barbed wire. And campaign work has ensured that any new developments now in the French mountains are legally required to be removed at the end of their lifespan. The presence of outdoor enthusiasts can bring benefits to wildlife as well. IOCA has supported snow leopards and eco-trekking in the Indian Himalayas, lynx and wolf awareness in the Carpathian Mountains, ecotourism in the Drakensberg Mountains in conjunction with vultures, and removed barbed wire to increase the range of brown bears in Italy's Apennines. Legally recognised and enforced protection of wild and mountainous areas is also a really important step towards unwanted development or destruction of these precious places. IOCA has helped to fund the safeguarding of over 22,000 hectares of wilderness in Turkey's Kure Mountains. A project in Patagonia currently is working to protect the Cochimo Valley and river from thousands of hikers and climbers by restoring sensitive habitat areas. And by supporting local NGOs, it's hoped that nature sanctuary status can be secured for the entire valley to safeguard against the effects of tourism and development. Finally, it's always vital to have the support and the involvement of local communities, particularly in remote regions. Bringing carefully controlled and sustainable ecotourism to an area in conjunction with sources of income and alternative livelihoods is a vital way of looking after threatened habitat and species. One project we funded took place in the Caucasus Mountains of Georgia. 1 million birds pass over this mountainous area during spring and autumn each year, including ospreys, kites, eagles and falcons, many of which are critically endangered. And the local communities gained kudos by how many they shot down. The project worked to create trails, bird hides and viewing platforms, train local guides and bring bird watchers and hikers to the area, ultimately giving much more value to the birds alive rather than dead. In that first year, overnight stays tripled locally, and within 5 years of the project, bird killings had dropped by 80%. Finally, and in conclusion, mountains and wild spaces, by their very nature, provide benefit to outdoor enthusiasts, whether it's challenging ourselves and our own abilities, looking after our mental health, or simply immersing ourselves in nature. These places are exceptionally special and need to be looked after to be kept that way. Without the interest and value placed on these areas by outdoor enthusiasts, the funding for IOCA's work could never have taken place. Ultimately, yes, outdoor enthusiasts can and do cause damage, but they also bring great blessing. We as a sector have a responsibility to educate, inform and teach outdoor enthusiasts to understand why certain behaviours in these environments are not acceptable. We need to ensure that outdoor activities in wild places, in particular in the mountains, can coexist respectfully with nature, bringing positive benefits to communities through involvement, alternative livelihoods and ecotourism, and give more value to wildlife alive than dead. and at the same time continue to fund work to restore and protect those areas where that's not happened. These areas need outdoor enthusiasts for their protection. As Sir David Attenborough says, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced. Thank you very much.
Yeah, back home, thank you so much for this inspiring talk. And it is really nice to see the role that the global outdoor industry can also take in trying to mitigate the negative impacts and turning actually the challenges of outdoor activities into opportunities. I would like now to see if there is one or two specific questions from the audience for Tanya. And I see there is a comment by Greg Mosley. It seems to me that there needs to be more cooperation between MRD and its members and the UIAA. I am president of the Mountaineering Commission of the UIAA, and we are currently rewriting a basic declaration on climbers and conservation. So I guess this is more a comment that we can take afterwards, but is there a specific question to Tanya regarding her presentation?
I think I've got off quite lightly.
And if not, we will continue the discussion after the presentations. That means that your presentation was very clear. And I would like now to invite Diana and Coco, who are the founders of the Asociación 7A Escalada, based in Pitumarca in Cusco, in the southern Peruvian Andes. Their presentation is in Spanish, and I will translate. So I hope that you will be patient with our presentation. So the title of the presentation is Climbing for the Conservation of Mountain Environments. Diana and Coco, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Bueno, gracias. Mi nombre, somos Diana y Coco. Somos los fundadores de la Asociación 7A Escalada.
So Diana and Coco are the founders of the Association 7A Escalada.
Nosotros desarrollamos una zona de escalada en Pitumarca, en Cusco, en los Andes de Perú, y empezamos a trabajar con las comunidades locales y buscamos como la mejor aproximación al desarrollo de estas zonas, ¿no? Para la conservación y también para educar a los escaladores.
So they have developed an area for climbing in Pitumarca district in Cusco department in the southern Peruvian Andes, where they're working together with local communities to develop the area, but in an environmental conscious way, and also to raise awareness among visitors.
The next slide, please. Bueno, como decía Coco, nosotros trabajamos, fundamos la asociación 7A Escalada para poder trabajar con la comunidad. Pitumarca es un pueblo de la sierra peruana que está aproximadamente a 3.600 metros sobre el nivel del mar, con una realidad específica que conviven dos tipos de gobiernos. Uno es el gobierno comunal, que son 14 comunidades diferentes, junto con el gobierno del estado distrital de Pitumarca.
So they founded the association 7A Escalada in order to work together with local communities in Pitumarca. So Pitumarca is a mountain town located at 3,600 meters above sea level, which includes local indigenous communities and with an overlapping government. So the local traditional government of these communities, but also the district governments.
Por esto tenemos una realidad específica que tiene que ver con que los dueños de los territorios donde trabajamos son las comunidades nativas indígenas.
So what is particular about that area where we work is that the actual owners of these territories where we work are the leaders of the indigenous communities or the indigenous communities in Pitumarca.
y también una diversidad histórica y cultural muy específica, ¿no?
But that's also an area with a very high diversity and very rich history and social history.
Por lo que los dueños de los territorios tienen sus propios objetivos, visiones y perspectivas acerca de qué es el desarrollo y qué quieren para sus comunidades, que no necesariamente son iguales a los que tiene un gobierno estatal.
So the local communities, indigenous communities, have their own views, visions, and objectives about what is development and what development they want for their territories, which do not necessarily coincide with what external actors such as ourselves or visitors may have.
Y por último, tienen un gran conocimiento y formas de investigación empíricas de su territorio.
They also have a huge wealth of knowledge about their territories and empirical ways of investigating and doing research about their areas.
Por otro lado, siguiendo con lo que han dicho los anteriores panelistas, sabemos que existe un riesgo de erosión por nuevos usos en el territorio que tienen que ver con las actividades outdoor.
So some of the challenges that we face in this area is the risk of erosion or degradation due to new activities and including outdoor activities.
También un riesgo de imponer y perder riqueza cultural.
Mm-hmm. There's also a risk of imposing from the outside and culture, external cultural elements, and a risk of cultural loss for local communities.
Y por último, un riesgo de perder el acceso a los territorios para poder hacer actividades outdoor.
Mm-hmm. And eventually for these indigenous communities, the risk of losing the access to their territories.
El siguiente slide, por favor. The next slide. Entonces, como asociación, tenemos el compromiso de ser flexibles, escuchar, buscar consensos con la comunidad local, generar una relación de confianza para evitar imponer visiones, y tenemos muy claro que no hay una sola receta para poder hacerlo.
So as an association, our commitment to the local communities is to be flexible, to listen to them, to build consensus, and also to generate a trust-based relationship with the community by avoiding imposing our own visions and also recognizing that there are no recipes.
The next slide, please. En este sentido, nosotros creemos que tenemos un desafío, pero que podemos usar la diversidad y el diálogo para contribuir a la gestión de estos entornos sin imponer ideas sobre qué es la conservación para nosotros y lograr una continuidad a largo plazo del proyecto que no dependa de nosotros como asociación, sino que sea manejado por ellos.
So we do recognize the challenges, but we believe that thanks to diversity and dialogue, we can contribute to the management of these environments without imposing our own ideas about conservation, and also ensure the project's long-term continuity in order to avoid depending on external interventions.
The next slide, please. Bueno, esto un poco ya lo hablamos. Nuestra asociación fue fundada por nosotros para promover el desarrollo ordenado de áreas al aire libre con el objetivo de una sostenibilidad natural, ambiental y social.
So the objective of our association, I don't know if we could move to the next slide. Thank you. Is to promote the orderly development of these areas for other activities, and also to ensure project social and environmental sustainability and an orderly access to mountain areas.
Y para lograrla tenemos como base la búsqueda de fondos a través de organizaciones o fundaciones para buscar capacitación e infraestructura. Es el slide anterior.
So, in order to achieve our objectives, we fundraise among foundations and other organizations in order to finance infrastructures, but also capacity development activities.
Y buscar alianzas para la investigación y entender qué está pasando para el desarrollo.
And also to try to establish partnerships with research in order to together look at potential development pathways.
Capacitación, o sea, generar capacitación para la gestión comunal.
Capacity development for communal management of these areas.
Y por último, el trabajo conjunto con la sociedad civil, dueña de los territorios de diferentes edades, no solo con los adultos, sino también enfocarnos mucho en los niños que serán los próximos líderes.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, also to work together with members of the civil society, not only with adults, but also a lot with children, who will be the next generation.
The next slide, please. Por último, teniendo en cuenta cómo somos como asociación, consideramos que es importante entender que la sociedad civil tiene distintas características. Por un lado, la comunidad local, que muchas veces son marginados en derechos básicos y oportunidades, y usan el espacio para subsistir y también viven permanentemente en el espacio. Y por otro lado, los visitantes o turistas, que son de muchas diversas culturas con necesidades específicas de servicio y seguridad y que son temporales en el territorio.
So it's important to understand that the civil society is quite heterogeneous, and on the one hand we have local communities which are often marginalized with regards to basic rights and opportunities, and who use this territory for subsistence and are permanently in these areas. And on the other hand, we have also visitors and tourists who have a temporary presence, and they are extremely diverse and come from distinct cultures, and they have specific needs for services and security.
The next slide, please. Entonces, convertir el desafío de las actividades al aire libre en oportunidades para nosotros significa crear estrategias en conjunto de desarrollo, de conservación, pero sobre todo de inclusión de la comunidad local en los posibles beneficios económicos, culturales y medioambientales para que estas oportunidades sean viables a largo plazo por ellos mismos.
So how to turn the challenges of outdoor activities into opportunities? For us, this means to jointly develop strategies for the development and conservation, but most of all for the inclusion of local communities into accessing economic, cultural, and environmental benefits from these outdoor activities.
Y the next slide. Y por último, nuestra responsabilidad como asociación consideramos que es mediar, buscar el diálogo y el equilibrio, reconociendo la importancia de entender las diferentes realidades y necesidades de ambas partes, y eso es a lo que nos dedicamos, a buscar ser el nexo y la responsabilidad.
Sorry, I will just quickly translate. So what is our responsibility as an association? We feel that our responsibility is to mediate and facilitate a dialogue by recognizing the importance of also understanding local realities and needs.
Y por último, la responsabilidad de la sociedad civil, ambos, los locales y los visitantes, es hacer un uso responsable y equilibrado de los espacios montañosos, como ya han estado diciendo, donde la empatía y la información son fundamentales.
And we feel that the responsibility of civil society, so both locals and visitors alike, is to make a responsible and balanced use of these mountain areas. And in order to achieve that, empathy and information are crucial.
Y bueno, eso es todo. Muchas gracias.
So thank you very much, Diana and Coco. Can we take one or two questions from the audience? I see that there is an interesting conversation going on in the chat. That's great. This is what these tools are for. Is there a specific question for Diana and Coco about their association and their work in the Peruvian Andes? I don't see any right now in the chat. As I said, we have the opportunity for discussion after all the presentations. And I would thus like, well, first of all, to thank you again, Diana and Jorge. It's great to see also how civil society can have an important role to play on the ground. And I would like now to invite our last panelist, Hans Garfelendorf from the United Nations Environmental Programme, who will share with us some insights about the Sports for Nature initiative. So, Ansgar, we would like to hear from you what could be the role of an international organization and international initiative in regards to the topic of our talk.
Thank you very much, Saralan, and thank you very much for the invitation to also share some insights from an international organization, namely the UN Environment Programme, where I work in the mountain team. And it has been very interesting to see the local realities and challenges, for example, in the Peruvian Andes. And I would like to zoom out a little bit and highlight some of the international global efforts that are going on with regards to outdoor sports and nature conversation. Just as a first slide, why does the United Nations really care about sports organizations and sports, outdoor sports, of course, also in particular, is simply that it reaches a lot of people, be it passively as visitors or viewers, but also actively as sports participants. So this is from a recent UNEP publication. It's called the Sports for Nature Handbook. And just some of the numbers, for example, for rock and sport climbing are 35 million people around the globe practice climbing. There's also 60,000 kilometers of skiing pistes, and then you also see some other numbers. So essentially, it's really important for us at UNEP and with partners to work with sports and for sports with regards to tackling the triple planetary crisis. We already heard from Tanya that EOCA tackles the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis in conjunction. There's, of course, a lot of linked issues. At UNEP, we talk about the triple planetary crisis. So the first being the climate crisis, the second being the nature and biodiversity crisis, and the third, the pollution and waste crisis. So in the first image, I think this was all over the media, at least in the European Alps and Northern Hemisphere, of winter tourism destinations not having enough snow, not having cold enough temperatures to provide for the outdoor sport activities. Of course, this is one consequence of warmer temperatures. Then the central picture is, I think, also went around the globe, is on top of Mount Everest as a kind of example of over-tourism in mountains. This was on Mount Everest by Nimsdai Purja, who was the Nepali guy who climbed the 8,000 meter plus peaks, I think, in less than a year. But of course, it's an example of, especially with COVID, in many places of the world, mountain ecosystems have experienced really a surge in visitor numbers. And this has come with challenges on wild spaces, on protected areas. Lina already shared that there's not always an acceptance to also respect nature protection areas. And then the third issue in the triple planetary crisis, of course, waste and pollution. For UNEP especially, the focus is on plastic pollution as one of the most harmful wastes in outdoor environments. And we conducted a survey with Grit Arendal 2 years ago to see where waste and plastics are seen. And you can see the results here. Essentially, more than 2/3 of respondents see waste in mountains every time they visit the outdoors. So what frameworks for action to tackle these triple planetary crises exist? The first, and this is very much, of course, the work we do at UNEP, is the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. And the member states of the CBD approved a new global biodiversity framework in December. And we work now on a program of work for mountain ecosystems to really support member countries and other stakeholders to ensure the conservation of biodiversity in mountains. And another global framework is the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is a framework to support restoration action and give momentum around the world to different initiatives. So I think this is also the answer to one of your questions, Sarah Lan. How can international initiatives contribute to outdoor activities as beneficial for mountain environments? So one is really setting the agenda with the topics that are supported by science as being very important, for example, ecosystem restoration, and then convening the different stakeholders, including governments, around these topics. And another recent initiative that is really in the making now as we speak is the Sports for Nature framework and Sports for Nature initiative, which is a partnership by the IUCN, the International Union for Nature Conservation, the International Olympic Committee, UNEP, the CBD Secretariat, and the Sales of Change Foundation to support the uptake of the 4 principles of the Sports for Nature framework. I will share the 4 principles in a moment. With sports organizations, sports federations, to give them momentum and ideas and the tools for nature conservation in what sports organizations do. So the first principle is to protect nature and avoid damage to natural habitats and species. And you can see the goal that this sports federation is signing up to is to commit to protect and avoid damage to natural habitats and species, including respecting protected areas. The second principle of the Sports for Nature framework is to restore and regenerate nature wherever possible. So to take positive action for nature in and around the indoor and outdoor environments. The third principle is to understand and reduce risks to nature in supply chains. So this is very technical, of course, to look at your own supply chains and analyze where harm to nature can be done. And the goal is to enable opportunities to conserve and restore nature in supply chains. Of course, some best practices exist, so it's also the task to share what one company or one sports federation is doing with others. And the fourth principle is to educate and inspire positive action for nature across and beyond sport. So to really use the power of sports events, power of sports organizations, some of them are really big brands, to inspire positive action. What the framework can offer to the signatories is access to expertise. So you see some of the IUCN guidance, but also a UNEP publication on sports and biodiversity, sports and urban biodiversity, and so on. So a lot of knowledge exists, and this framework is there to share it with sports federations and actors. It supports pilot projects and provides a help desk. And now an online platform is being built with different knowledges being shared. Of course, one of the best practice examples that we also brought in is the, since it was in the chat, the UAAA Mountain Protection Award, where a lot of the mountain protection activities are being highlighted and given a platform already. Other opportunities of the Sports for Nature framework are champions network. So again, using the outreach of athletes, of sportswomen and sportsmen, and inspire and influence action. For example, at the United Nations Environment Assembly next year. So I think one thing that is really important for UNEP and to really inspire change, or not only inspire, but reach change, is the importance of partnerships with key actors. So the UAA Mountain Protection Award was already mentioned. Another partnership that we are very active with is with the International Olympic Committee. So you can see 10 steps to be a mountain hero, which were, for example, also shared by the International Ski Federation and with their members to really get the word out how to reduce the impact on nature. And at the bottom, you can also see a side event on reducing plastic waste with outdoor activities, where there exist very good strategies already to avoid use of single-use plastic in mountain environments. I'll stop here and looking forward to the discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ansgar, not only for informing us about some of these global frameworks, but also sharing some of these very concrete and interesting resources that are freely available for everyone. Do we have one or two specific questions from the audience, either in the chat or by raising your hand? I see a question by Susan Wieman. Thank you for the presentation. Does the framework also foresee the collaboration with local communities? I guess that's the Sport for Nature framework.
Thank you for the question. Of course, the main stakeholders are the signatories to the Sports for Nature's framework. So far it is, if I'm not mistaken, around 40, including, for example, the National Olympic Committee of Spain, but also the National Olympic Committee of Papua New Guinea, if I'm not mistaken. Then World Rugby Federation is a member. Then I think the National Swimming of Hungary, but also the trail running, Ultra Trail Running Mont Blanc series, if it's called this way. So it's different levels. And of course, then these levels also work with local stakeholders. But the target group is not communities per se, but really the sports community that hosts sports events or series and so on.
Thank you very much, Ansgar. Is there any other question? So I would like to invite you, before we move to the discussion part of our talk, to just answer a very brief poll so that we get to know a little bit more who is participating in the talk today. Brigitte, I don't know if you could share the poll. Okay, so I think that I invite you to look at the results from the poll yourself. You can scroll down to see the answer to the 3 questions. We see that almost all of our participants today are actually practitioners of outdoor activities. Interestingly, when we look at the potential effects our activities have on mountain environments, most of you think that this is rather negative. However, when we look at the potential effects on mountain societies, then this is seen as rather positive. So that's something interesting that we can take along for our discussion. I would like now to invite you to reflect together on some concrete next steps, actions, and measures. We heard some very interesting and presentations, and we saw some examples as concrete contributions that science, but also the private sector, civil society, and international organizations can do to contribute to this, to the question of outdoor activities and to make sure that they are beneficial. I would like now to invite you to click on a link that will appear in the chat to a Jamboard. So if you could please click on this link. I think that my colleague will also share the screen so that you can look, okay, you can also see on the screen what it looks like. On this Jamboard, we've prepared 4 slides. 1 slide for each group of each sector or each group of actors that we had, for which we had representatives among our panelists. So the first one regarding research. So from the side of research, what should be done, what could be done, what are concrete measures or actions or next steps that you foresee, either based on what you heard today, on your own experiences and knowledge. The second slide ask the same question, but from the perspective of the private sector. So here we had the example of the European Outdoor Association and of outdoor brands, but there can be, of course, other actors from the private sector, many actually involved in the outdoor activities. This third slide would like to look at this question from the side of civil society. We had the example of the association CTA Escalada, which is a local community-based association, but there can be other NGOs and other civil society actors involved. And the fourth slide would like to answer this question from the perspective of international organizations and perspectives. So you do not need to, of course, to answer to all of this. Maybe you feel more comfortable or you have something to contribute specifically in one or the other of these slides. You can simply double click on any of the sticky notes and write your very short answer. So please feel free to take a few minutes to share some of your ideas and thoughts in this Jamboard. If you have any difficulty entering the Jamboard or entering the information into the sticky notes, please also feel free to just enter them into the chat and we will copy them for you into the Jamboard. Well, thank you very much. I think, of course, we could go on and add a lot of your inputs, but I propose that we look at it together. We can also add some things together in the discussion. Brigitte, could you please, would you mind sharing maybe the first slide regarding research? And here we can see some several contributions around the importance of providing more evidence and data on outdoor activities, more specifically on the effects of outdoor activities. And there are some also hints for also not understanding only the impact of these activities, but also looking into mitigation and restoration practices. So really transformation knowledge that can then inform interventions. There is also, there are also here some notes and some suggestions about the importance of educational programs and participative science programs, so involving different stakeholders into these research activities, but also raising awareness about the mountain environment and starting from a young age. So here a suggestion for including this into school curricula as well. I see some very interesting contribution here about the need for inclusion of more diverse groups into research teams. And I think this speaks also very well to Diana and Coco's presentation, where they really highlighted the fact that local communities in Pitumarca, for instance, in the Peruvian Andes, have their own visions and worldviews on what should be development, what is their territory, what are these mountain areas, and this should also be brought into the research. So in order to do that, we need to become more diverse and more inclusive in terms also of our research programs and research activities. I would like to invite maybe some of you to comment, to highlight one of these points. Please do raise your hand if you want to add or to highlight one of these points regarding some specific measures in terms of research. Okay, I don't know if this was a hand. You can use the hands button on the Zoom. So if you can get back to the Zoom, or yes, I see that Kostas has raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I think that there is not a lot of research, but we have a good amount of research understanding what's happening in the outdoors, especially in the field of recreation ecology, when we're looking at evidence of effects of outdoor activities. For me, the bigger problem is that research is not necessarily translated into policy. So I think that is something that perhaps researchers and international organizations should be looking a bit more to see how what we already know, because we do know a lot of things about climate change, right? We do know how outdoor recreation is affected by climate change, but we don't necessarily see those policies. So for me, that would be an interesting topic to look more into. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this contribution. And here maybe possibly we could bridge also with that concern by Ansgar regarding international organizations and how this could help build this bridge between scientific evidence and actual policy arenas at the global level, but then also, of course, at the national levels. Is there someone else who wants to comment something regarding the role of research? Ansgar, please.
Just to maybe transmit a need that we have identified. So when we drafted the Sports for Nature baseline report, we were looking for data and information on the surge of outdoor visitors due to COVID, which was, I think, something experienced in the European Alps, but also we heard in the Caucasus, in Georgia, people visited the mountains more, and we did not find the data. So really also looking at these, what are the needs of decision makers, local communities, tourist destination managers, and so on. So really to provide the evidence, the data, the information, the facts, to then take appropriate measures. That's certainly something we have identified as a gap. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So very important, and that's a call that for researchers. So please do include the other stakeholders into the research design, and specifically into the definition of the problems that needs to be addressed, to make sure that we respond to the needs of these different stakeholders involved in outdoor activities. So with this, I propose that we pass now to the second slide and to look a little bit about your contributions regarding the private sector. So find more sustainable production methods for gear. And here also something in line with this, and which bridges also with the question of research, the role of researchers that should collaborate to find more sustainable solutions to products and services. So both in terms of technology, but also in terms of services. So here also a call for a more transformative research aimed at finding ways of doing things better. Funds to nature conservation as part of the business model. And here I think we had this great example from the European Outdoor Association, and how they were able to actually raise quite a lot of money. So could this be established as a mainstream practice? Is it already a mainstream practice? If not, should we raise more awareness among outdoor companies to make sure to include this type of funding for conservation, restoration into their business model? Is there anyone who would like to? Oh, okay, I see that Tanya raised her hand. Please go ahead, Tanya.
I like a lot of these suggestions. Thank you very much. And I particularly love the putting 5% of revenue into funds for nature conservation. I think that's so important. EOCA as a model could work brilliantly in other industries. It works particularly well in the outdoor industry because that's where the industry's livelihood comes from. It comes from people going into the outdoors. But when you think we have currently nearly 160 members, trade shows that we go to, there are 900 exhibitors. So, you know, even though we have quite a lot of member companies, there's still a massive amount of companies out there that could be joining in, and we are just one sector as well. So I'm loving that idea. Regards to finding more sustainable production methods and sort of working together to reduce microplastics and things like that. There's a lot of stuff like that going on already at the moment. And in fact, the European outdoor industry has worked very hard on reducing the amount of plastic. You know, every time a t-shirt gets made, it gets wrapped in plastic, and then every single t-shirt's also wrapped in plastic, and that's then put in another large plastic bag. So they've been working very hard to try to reduce those sorts of things, and there are groups around doing those kinds of things. But yes, it needs to happen more quickly. And reducing outdoor gear production, again, outdoor companies are looking into, a lot of them offer repair services so that you're keeping your jackets and your rucksacks and your tents going for a longer lifespan. And yeah, reducing production, that's a really, yes, it needs to happen, but it's really tricky, isn't it? Because how do we as a business reduce what we're making? And that's the conundrum at the moment for all businesses, isn't it? Because at the moment, marketing and business, it's all about increasing your size. So that's a really tricky one, but all really good points. I'm just reading the one about pollution now. Yeah, repair services again. So yes, I've talked enough, but they're all really good and interesting points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for your feedback. Very informative and important. And I think that the discussion needs to continue, but we will now look at some of the ideas we got from the perspective of civil society. Then go to the slide number 3. So I will translate, there is one in Spanish. So I guess it comes from Diana and Coco about the importance of getting information about the local reality of the place that we want to visit. So I would add knowing the place where they're active. Also this importance about cultural sensitivity and awareness. So not only about environmental, but really cultural awareness and respect for local societies and cultures is extremely important. Also education, the importance of education on how to behave appropriately in mountain and wild places, and how this should be actually included into school curricula where appropriate. So maybe mainstream education about outdoor activities. And in general, here some comments that are more, I would say, geared towards individual behavior, reduce traveling for recreation and tourism, travel more locally. So reduce traveling does not mean do not travel, but maybe more locally and make better choices when it comes to purchasing gear or using certain equipment. So these comments call more on individual responsibility and behavior. And interestingly, another comment, suggestion to build pressure on decision makers, local governments, companies, etc., to conserve and restore nature. So I would like to invite any of the participants to comment or to add any point. And I just see in the chat something that needs to be highlighted. Congratulations to the Asociación 7A for winning the 2022 UIAA Mountain Protection Award. Congratulations, Diana and Coco. That's wonderful. So any comments or additional contribution from the audience? Diana or Coco, do you have anything to comment on one of these suggestions? You can also say it in Spanish, of course.
Gracias. Sí, o sea, los comentarios son muy buenos. La educación es importante para todos los que practicamos deportes al aire libre.
So yes, Coco says thanks for the comments. They're really good, and in particular, education is essential for all of us who practice outdoor sports.
Nosotros estamos tratando de trabajar con la comunidad local para que ellos puedan manejar este lugar que nosotros desarrollamos, que lo que nosotros hacemos es desarrollar un parque de escalada acá en Pitumarca, un parque de escalada en roca, y nuestra idea es que el parque sea sustentable y que sea manejado por la comunidad local y que busque reducir el impacto que tienen en el lugar, ¿no? No solo en las áreas naturales, también en los visitantes, ¿no? O sea, esperamos que la gente que llegue sea más educada y tengamos como una mejor cultura al acceder a las áreas naturales.
So, and here Coco gives the example of their own activity in Pitumarca, which is to develop a climbing park together with local communities. So the idea is that this park can then be managed by the local communities And the objective is to reduce potential negative impacts, not only on the environment, but also in terms of flow of visitors, but also to educate visitors so that they use it in a more responsible and respectful way. Muchas gracias, Coco. I propose that we go now to the next slide about the perspective from international organizations. And I see we have now more comments. Okay, so the one in yellow, a call for building networks, how to connect these different organizations with similar aims, but which work in parallel or in a fractured way. And what would be the role or the potential role of international organizations in doing so. And then there are also some calls for policy incidents, for instance, on EU and country and national level policies through lobbying to implement change and guidance, I guess, guidelines regarding outdoor activities. And here there are also some comments that align with those that we already saw in the previous slide regarding more the individual responsibility and how to promote more and more locally based outdoor experiences versus a more far away or international outdoor traveling. Again, and I'm sorry because I'm reading at the same time as I'm commenting. So I'm a bit repeating, but I see that there are actually 2 or 3 other contributions that all go into that call for bringing together in networks of actors, but also of information, the different sectors and the different actors that are involved in outdoor activities. And here I see that yes, indeed, there are several comments in this line. Ansgar, did you want to comment something?
Yes, just briefly, and thank you very much, everyone, for these very interesting and valuable inputs. I just wanted to also highlight again that today's webinar for me is a very good example to bring together representatives from local civil society organization, from UN organization, from in the chat we saw UAA representatives, so international federations, and this refers to the Spanish input, crear vínculos y redes de información, so to really create these spaces to collaborate across different stakeholders and sectors. And then one comment, yeah, I really enjoy also that promote local experiences, so you don't have to travel around half the globe to enjoy beautiful nature, but you can also enjoy or discover your own backyard wherever you're based and enjoy these beautiful natural spaces there. And yeah, looking at the time, I'll stop there, but thank you for the inputs.
Thank you very much. And I thank all of you for all your comments. We, of course, do not have the time to go into a deep discussion on all of it. However, we will bring together all the insights from both the presentations, but also the discussion and your inputs into this Jamboard into a short blog, which we will share with all participants in a couple of weeks, and where you will be able to also find a link to the recording of this talk and also to specific resources provided by the panelists. So I invite you to continue the conversation also after this talk. I think there were a lot of very rich and very interesting ideas that came in this discussion. One thing that overall came to my mind when listening to the different presentations, that maybe 2 aspects I would like to highlight. One is the question of the access to the outdoors. Is it a global common? Is it does everyone has the right to access freely to these environments? And here I'm thinking of the example given by Lena in the first talk about the people practicing ski touring who were resistant to restrictions, you know, claiming that this was a kind of a right to a commons, right? But on the other hand, we have the example in the Peruvian Andes where these actual outdoor places, so-called nature, are the ancestral territories of existing communities with their own visions and worldviews, and which actually use these territories for their subsistence. So the question of who has access to these, how to mediate the access to these areas and how to do it in a responsible way. And this comes now to the second point I wanted to make, which was about responsibility. I think that in all, throughout all these presentations, but also the discussion in the end, we saw that definitely there was among the participants today awareness about the responsibility of each actor in ensuring that on the one hand, for the practitioners, that their impact are not negative or even positive, but also for local policymakers or for the civil society organizations, for international organizations, how to make sure to have guidelines or policies or initiatives that can try to mitigate the potential negative effects of these activities, but also to enhance their beneficial effects and impacts on the local economies and local communities. Another question which was raised quite clearly in the last discussion, and which also came to my mind when listening to the different presentations, is how now to link these different actors. So on the one hand, we have at the local level, the visitors, local communities, then we have the civil society organizations and NGOs, etc. On the other hand, the private sector with their own initiatives, and then international organizations who are setting the agendas, and lastly, governments. So how do we make sure that they work in a collaborative way? How do we make sure that the interventions are designed in an inclusive way and in a more effective way? So here we have some suggestions and call for more collaboration, but these are definitely points that are important to follow up. So with that, I think that we are already arriving to the end of our talk. I don't know if we had last slide. As I said, the key insight, you will receive a notification when we publish in approximately a couple of weeks this blog with the summary of all these insights and the link to resources. I would also like to announce that we will have a next talk mid-September, so please stay tuned. The next talk will be on the importance of monitoring of social ecological systems in mountains. So I hope to see some of you again in September for our next talk. I would like to thank again our great panelists for their time, for their insights and their sharing their experiences. And I would like also to thank the support team and all of the participants. Thank you.